Welcome to another episode of Team Upside Talks. Today, we are lucky enough to have Ethel on the podcast. To give a very brief overview of our guest, Ethel is an incoming undergraduate student to Bristol University, where she will be studying education. She was previously an undergraduate at Oxford for a year before she dropped out to pursue her passion for education and social mobility instead. Ethel is our very hardworking sponsorship and outreach officer at Team Upside, and this podcast will be all about listening to and learning from her quite unorthodox but very inspiring journey through education. Cool. So without further ado, Ethel, question number one. How would you describe the kind of secondary school you went to?
I love that intro, by the way.
I put a lot of time
yeah.
into it.
I think we actually went to the same secondary school.
Yes, we did.
So you can attest to this. But I think one of the biggest things that stands out about our school was how ethnically diverse it was compared to a lot of other schools. I think a lot of it is a product of the town it's in. It's in Slough. So if people don't know what Slough is, I think it's the most ethnically diverse town outside of London. It's basically a town built on immigration. It's very much white British people are actually a minority here, which is mind-blowing compared to the rest of the UK. I don't know about you, but every time I step outside of Slough or London, I'm just taken aback at how white the UK is.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
yeah, I think with our school being that sort of environment, I think I learned a lot from other people's cultures and other people's perception of life and different ways of thinking, and for that I'm very grateful. I think another thing about our school is it's a grammar school, right? So you had to take the 11 plus to get in, you had to get a certain grade. I think sometimes I've talked about some of the positives, but I think with a grammar school especially, there were also a lot of times where I felt like people didn't realize how privileged in a position we were in.
Mm-hmm.
I remember this one history teacher saying this very vividly, her saying some of the students here don't recognize how lucky they are.
Mm-hmm.
And that honestly really made me reflect, and because there were many conversations where people would just casually say how bad the school is, how they wish they were another school, blah, just whatever people were just saying offhand. But I think after that I heard that comment from the teacher, it made me properly think about what other state comps were actually like, and the resources and the teachers we had access to.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when I think about our school, I think about both how it's this melting pot of cultures, but also having different types of privileges, and how a lot of students had tutors outside of school, things like that.
Yeah,
there was still very much oblivious to other areas of privilege aside from race.
Beyond the school, let's talk more about your actual attitude towards education. So you as a student, how would you say your attitude towards education changed during your time in secondary school?
I would say I was seen as quite a student who was very on it. I didn't cause any trouble, nothing big anyway. Teachers generally liked me. I say generally, there was this one teacher in year 8, this English teacher, she had it out for me for no reason. I don't even know why, but generally teachers seemed to have no issue with me. Yeah. I would get my work done, that kind of thing. I think maybe around, I do want to mention, I think from a very young age, it was instilled with me, because the family I grew up in, the parents I have, education has always been a priority. I think little things always made me feel very grown up as well about education. My mum from year 7 taught me how to use headers on a Word document.
Oh, no way.
Even that, that having that little thing where you have the page number in the corner, that made me feel very in control of everything.
That's crazy. Yeah, I feel like I learned how to do that literally 6 months ago.
Yeah, no, every piece of homework of mine would look identical, the headers, the name, the date, the subject, the page number. But yeah, I think that's an accurate reflection of the kind of student I was. Yeah, so it goes from a very serious sort of student to slightly less serious to, and then I think year 13 is when I overdid it. I think year 13 was too much focus on work, if that makes sense. Because the pressure is so high during A-levels especially. And I think even in my spare time, I literally restricted what I was what I was allowed to watch on YouTube. Like I told myself I can only watch things that are at least vaguely educational. So I was fully just binge watching all the like study tubers, you know?
Yeah, Ali Abdal's
Yeah,
videos. Yeah.
yeah. So honestly, I was either working or watching people work. So I feel like that was like a step too far.
But let's move on to the next question, which is, what were some of your proudest achievements / successes as a student?
I think for this question, you'd probably expect it to be something like, oh, this time I like won this award, or this time I got like 100 out of 100 on this exam.
Right.
But I think for me, the things that stand out the most are like the more discrete stuff. Like, for instance, when someone would come to me with like a maths problem or something,
Right.
I feel like those are the moments that I like feel the most proud of. Like every single time, like someone felt like for some reason I wasn't like an authority on that subject. Like I was good enough for people to actually come to me to get help or something. And I think it's like there's no satisfaction like having all like 4 of you or something at a table working on the same math question, and then finally one of you cracks it or something like that. I think having that like collaboration of minds and then finally reaching an answer, those little moments, but they all like add up. Those are my most like proudest moments and like most nostalgic moments as well.
That's crazy, because I have a very precise memory of coming to you to ask for help on so many different questions. So I'm happy to know that
like
I was a source
you
of
and Simrit, like
happiness.
with maths and stuff in A level. I love just like taking a break and looking at something new. Yeah.
Honestly, Ethel was the person to go to, man. She was, man. She had her stuff together, 100%. I wouldn't have been able to go through maths without Ethel, man. And economics. But yeah, okay, cool. So we've touched on some of the successes and moments where you felt pride. Let's move on to some of the stuff that people tend to talk about less often. Let's talk about a moment, a story where you feel like you failed during your time at school.
Something that stands out the most to me is, I think, year 11 mocks. So just before GCSEs, we had like those like exams leading up to it. History was one of the subjects, with the one subject that I didn't get like that A or A star in it. In history mocks, I actually got a C. I remember during like parents' evening, Mr. Bowles being like, yeah, she got a C or something. Like history tends to have a very steep learning curve and that kind of thing. But also like just in comparison to all the other subjects, it was very much like, oh, I need to do something about this. Like history was always one of those subjects that, to me at least, was much more difficult than like maths or science, which I felt like had more like overtly logical systems. So like you can work through this, like this is step 1, this is step 2. With history, I felt there was more nuance, like at least at GCSE stage. Like I know maths gets a lot more nuance like at degree and above level, but like with something like that, when you're suddenly confronted with like whatever you see as a failure, whether that's a C or an F or whatever, I think that makes you just stop and reflect and like, what are you doing wrong, that kind of thing. And it made me realize that, I mean, logically we already know this, but you should work on what you're weaker at. Right, but it's so easy to just keep doing what you're really good at because it feels like you're progressing faster, even though you're not making any actual progress. So yeah, I think that's one thing that I learned, that like I took away from that. And I know for a fact that like my little brother, who's still at the same school that we went to, Mr. Bowles, to this day, he like makes an example out of it. He's like, I had this one student who got like a C in her mocks, and then she listened to all my advice, and then she got an A star in the end. Like, I don't know. Apparently, that's my legacy now.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation that there was a teacher who said something to you that made you reflect on your privileges and the privileges of the rest of your class. On that topic of teachers, were there any other mentors during your time at school that really helped you along the way?
In terms of like mentors at school, so like teachers surrounding us, I can definitely like off the top of my head probably name like 4, but it's not necessarily for their like a specific interaction that they had with me. I think it was more them just existing as role models within my life, like seeing them be passionate, being like really good at their job, like actually, you know, that they actually wanted to be teachers, that they wanted to be there in that classroom and that they were invested in you, kind of thing. Because like students can absolutely tell when a teacher doesn't want to be there. Like when you go walk into a classroom and you see that a teacher doesn't care, like the default is for you to not care. So then already there's that hurdle of you having to put in that effort yourself to make sure that, because the teacher isn't, you know, putting in the effort, then you have to make up for that. So I think just seeing people being like really, really good at just whenever you see someone really good or really passionate about something, I think that's really inspiring. And I think it gave me the motivation to replicate that in some way, to be one day as passionate as they are about their subject or about their work.
Despite the fact that you did have great teachers, do you wish you were taught differently? Anything about what you were taught that you wish was different going through school?
I've thought about this question like over the years, especially since like leaving school. I think I've sort of settled on my answer being, if I could only change one thing, it would be setting aside some sort of time consistently, or at least semi-consistently, to be taught explicitly about things like mental health,
right,
or like being actually reflective, like allowing yourself to just look back and think, like just pause for a second, because I know especially during sixth form, like once you've chosen your A levels, it's just like go from there. Like there is no pause. You're just constantly working. And I think even just like setting aside a little time to explicitly explore things that you might not be so certain about, or explore genuinely how you're doing, would have been really valuable. And I think really valuable to our school's demographic, especially, I think, because things like mental health are so stigmatized within like Asian culture. I think that would have been massively beneficial to a lot of the students within our year, within our school in general, because there were a lot of people who were just very lost, I think, and just going with what they were supposed to do. They weren't like stopping to think, and me included, weren't stopping to think, what is the next step I should actually take, or what's the next step that would be the most meaningful to me in the long term. And I think having a space to do that, to find out which direction you actually want to go, would have been massively beneficial to a lot of people.
No, that's such a really good point, man. I actually think, if not after year 11, then definitely after year 12, if we had just a week of just no academic kind of classes, just events talking about, like you said, reflecting on our time so far, reflecting on the course that we're about to apply for, reflecting on the different opportunities available, whether it be apprenticeship, whether it be university. I think that would have been really beneficial. And I think if any teachers are listening to this, I'm not sure they will be. That's a really good idea for them to take on board. Before we move on to your time at university and just university as a category, let's answer the quite important question for a lot of young people, and that's to do with revision. So when it came to GCSE exams and when it came to A-level exams, what was your approach to revision and how did it change from GCSE to A-level?
I would say for GCSE, let's like tackle GCSE first. I think from like very young, it was instilled in me to like set things out, like this is what I need to accomplish, like what days am I going to do this bit. Like my mom used to help me like make timetables on Excel, like even from like 11 plus days. Like that's how young it was like ingrained in me from. So it's always been like a priority to be prepared, to make sure you're pacing yourself. Because it honestly is like practice, is having that consistent revision. You can split like GCSE into different subjects and things. For people watching, like the ones that I got to choose, so like besides like science, maths, English and stuff, I chose history, art and Mandarin. Especially subjects like maths, that's like literally all about practice. Like do as many past paper questions as you can. I would say a massive resource for most of the content heavy, so like you have to learn theories, things like science, I'd say you can find like amazing resources on YouTube, like, and it's completely free. Like there are people out there who like have entire channels dedicated to specific curriculums, specific like AQA or NXL or OCR, like whatever. Like you can find someone, and those, especially if you're like a visual or you love like audio learning, that's like massively helpful. Like you can pause and you can just go along at your pace. Group study, if you're able to study with, I would say be wary of who you choose to study with. Because like there are some people where you can just very easily get distracted. I would say figure out who you can actually be productive with, if group study is something that helps give you motivation, and finding the environment that you work best in. I know a lot of people work like really well in libraries. I'm like one of those weird people who like don't, because I think it's just because from like young I've worked in like really noisy environments, like in the middle of the living room, like I've got stuff all sprawled around me. So that's just how I revise. To this day, if I'm revising, I will have to be on the floor. Like, but yeah, I would say without going into like specific subjects, generally like do not underestimate YouTube. That's a massive one, and do not underestimate past papers.
I just like to reiterate the point about consistency and the point about pacing yourself. I remember every time a younger student would ask me for advice, I would literally say to them, it's much better for you to do 30 minutes to an hour a day, 5 days a week, than to cram the weekend of revision. Just that consistency is so key, especially across the 2-year period of A levels. When like you said earlier, it's a marathon. You need to have stamina to kind of get through that entire period. So yeah, thank you for sharing that really valuable advice. So let's move on to, when it came to choosing a course for university, what course did you initially choose? And what was your kind of mindset in terms of choosing a course at university? And just talk us through that experience over the last 2 years of switching courses.
So if you guys were listening really closely to Sully's introduction, I initially went with econ and management, and eventually I went to Oxford. But like when I was applying, all my other options were econ and philosophy. It was only Oxford that was econ and management. If you're asking about a specific moment when I chose that, I don't really remember. I feel like me choosing econ was very much me on cruise control.
Right.
Like it was just happening to me kind of thing. And I think the first red flag would have been the fact that all my other courses were econ and philosophy. And I think I chose philosophy purely out of wanting something not econ. But yeah, I think I just chose something and I went along with it because of my A levels. It like made sense. Like before I chose my A levels, I just sort of briefly went like, okay, which route am I taking? Which you should definitely do before you choose your A levels. Like certain subjects you need to have certain A levels. But yeah, for people who don't know, I did econ, maths, and media studies, which sounds a bit out of the blue. So I thought logically it follows to sort of go econ route, right? So I followed through with it. I somehow got into Oxford. I think if I was to describe my time at Oxford, first of all, I don't regret it at all. I would not change like a single thing about any decisions I made, even with hindsight, because I think it was all necessary. It was all necessary. Oxford, I met like loads of amazing people, and it really does broaden your horizons. Like getting outside of the Slough and the London bubble, like even if it was into another bubble, like the Oxbridge bubble, it like you meet people that you otherwise would never have met, and that I'm still in contact with like to this day. And I think in terms of the course, honestly did not spend that much of my time there doing the course. I would say econ, I didn't feel too strongly either way about, like it was just something I did. Econ would be like a couple essays, but mainly problem solving. Like you have a question, then you've got like 10 parts to do, that kind of thing. Management was split for first year into finance and general management. So general management was like very essay based. It was presenting an argument using like sources to say, okay, I'm arguing this point, this might be a counterpoint, that kind of thing, like your general humanities type essay. And so there was a lot of reading for that. And then for finance is another language. It genuinely is another language. I cannot say a good thing about finance.
Okay. It was just not your cup of tea then.
It was not my thing at all. No, it was like accounting, and it was also financial analysis. It was very much the world that probably most of my course mates will go into.
Right.
Because my cohort was econ and management at Oxford is very small. It's like there's like 80 people on the course, and yeah, they'll probably all end up in the city. I just really couldn't see myself in that position, I think. And I think that became more and more clear as the year went on, that there were people surrounding me doing that course that were genuinely really, really interested in it.
Yeah.
And I think before that point, I couldn't imagine someone being so interested in something like finance. I think once I got to that point and I saw people that passionate about it, it made me realize like, wait, am I on the right course kind of thing? And the fact, on top of that, the fact that I was spending so much time doing other stuff, whether that's socializing with other people or getting involved with, I did quite a lot of volunteering with Oxford Hub, which is like the hub of social change. And like I did a lot of work with children, like primary schools and early years. I spent a lot more time on that than I should have dedicated to my degree had I like been a serious candidate kind of thing. Yeah, I think all of these were like signs that I wasn't on the right course. And I think once it forced me to be reflective, that's why I value reflection so much. I think we should do it frequently, and we should dedicate a lot of time to just focus on reflection in order to actually grow from it. And honestly, I just reached the conclusion that this this isn't the route that I need to keep going down. And I just sort of needed to take that leap and just drop out, I guess.
That's it. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe we can just touch on this briefly before we move on to the final question, which very neatly ties into, I mean, your next steps as a student to study education. What was the reaction of your friends, your close circle of friends and family? Were they initially quite resistant? Did they eventually come around to your decision? Because I'm sure a lot of people are thinking like, how can you drop out of Oxford? I mean, it must have been very difficult for other people who weren't in your place to understand that decision. So maybe talk a little bit about that if you can.
So I would, like you said, resistant is the word I would use, because like obviously from their point of view, it's like out of nowhere. It seems like a very rash decision to make. And if I was in their shoes, I would also question it. I would be like, well, are you making the right decision? Because it is a life-changing decision. Like there's no denying that. And there was a lot of work put into it. But the fact is, once you get to a point where like this is what it's supposed to be, like this is it, it can be very anticlimactic to be like, well, okay, this is it. And I think a lot of my closest friends were definitely like resisting. They were giving me back and forth. We would talk about it. They are not ones to shy away from confrontation with me if they have to. I think those are the kind of people that you need in your life though. Like if they feel like you might be going down the wrong path, you need people in your life who will challenge you on that and make sure that you're making the right decision. So I'm very grateful for the people that I have in my life.
So we've come towards the end of our conversation, and I feel like this question is so important, and it's something that I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on, especially because you're about to go and study education. So Ethel, my final question for you is, what does education mean to you?
As you said, I want to be studying education, which is very meta, but like honestly, if I were to put it concisely, I genuinely think education underpins everything. I think whether that's refining a skill, talent, or how you interact with people within society, or like the person that you eventually want to become, I think all of it interwoven is education, because you need growth for any of those things. And I think growth can only come from learning. And when I say education, I don't mean just formal education. So I'm not talking about you need to GCSEs or A-levels or a degree or any of that. I'm just talking about experiences. I'm talking about learning from other sources, learning from other people, taking the initiative to research into things or reflect on yourself, things like that. All of that I count as learning. All of that I count as education. I think every single one of us wants to be a lifelong learner, whether you consciously or subconsciously acknowledge that, because no one wants to be stagnant in who they are. Like exactly, no one wants to be like, okay, this is the point where I peak and everything's downhill from here. Like, exactly. You want to keep growing up until whenever, like however long you can, you want to keep growing. And in whatever environment you do that best, whether that's university or outside, I think you should take that route. So yeah, to me, education would just be growth, I think.
You can find out more about Team Upside by checking us out on social media at Team Upside, or by visiting our website teamupside.co.uk. If you enjoy our episodes, please remember to leave us a review. Take care and see you soon.